All right, welcome everybody to the Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. I feel like November out there, but I'll take it. Meeting and Conference Transportation Planning Committee, thanks for coming. Welcome to all those, I guess, in TV land. I'll start with introductions. Myself, Steve Reaney, Schenectady County, Bob Rice, New York State DOT. Greg Richard, New York State DOT.
Randy Milano, City of Albany.
Liz Cornrows, Village of Wilson Spa.
Chris Wallen, City of Schenectady.
John Scavo, Clifton Park.
Patrick Jordan, Board of Albany. Ross Farrell, CDTA. Andrew Kreshik, City of Troy.
Josie McGrave, City of Cohoes. Sean McGuire with the home team, Town of Colony.
Mark Stiglione, CDRPC.
Sandy Missowitz, CDTC.
Megan Park, CDTA.
Jacob Dean, CDTC.
Pastor Ashak, City of Cohoes. Rebecca Odell, CDTC.
I'm CDTC, Andrew Tracy, CDTC.
Jen Spillman, CDTC. Elena Levesque, CDTC. Carrie Ward, CDTC.
Lorenzo Staff Known ISDOT. Peter Townsend, Colorado, and Chris Bauer, CDTC.
Teresa LaSalle, CDTC.
Yeah, it says thank you, visitors issues. Don't see any visitors. So we'll move right into a presentation, CDTA bus red line upgrades. Ross, I'm assuming that's you. Thank you.
That is me. So thanks, everyone. There's an item on the agenda related to a drawdown of our BRT set aside to go to T137. Think of T137 as this presentation. So what CDTA is doing is looking at our first BRT line and starting to make upgrades to it to match the rest of our BRT system. Next slide. Just some background to the line. It's actually over 10 years old. Began service in 2011. But if you back that out, we've been talking about building that line, whether it was at the CDTC table or at CDTA all the way back in 2005. It's a 17-mile corridor, has 19 stations that go through a number of different municipalities. I think the key part to point out here is that it's 8-minute frequency. So that's a very frequent service, especially for any sort of mid-sized region like ourselves. The ridership of it is in the last year, roughly about 3 million rides. That equates to nearly a quarter of our system. So that's one corridor that equates to nearly a quarter of all the ridership in our system. The BRT line has shown itself to be very resilient. COVID-19, if you look at the two fiscal years, comparing the fiscal year before the pandemic, fiscal year after, system-wide went down by over a third, but only 19% on the red line. And the best news is that as of last month, and we're hoping it's actually going to be closer to 100% in the month of October, but in September, it was back to 96% of pre-COVID levels. So it just proves that, BRT is what people want, and have stayed with it throughout the changes in the region and country and really the world. Next slide. So what is T137? It can be broken out into 3 different areas. First is a refresh of the stations themselves. The shelters and the areas directly adjacent to them. I'll get into what that is in a second. Really the biggest piece of it though is a change to the infrastructure on the street. So when we built the red line and when we went, if you look back at the dates when we were doing the design, it was really a time, 15 years ago, let's say, it was 15 years ago. So a lot of the improvements and prioritization of especially pedestrians and changes to roadways to improve the pedestrian environment wasn't something that we had proposed or we would have ever had approved by the roadway owners at that time. Obviously, it's a decade and a half later, things have changed. I think in general, people, especially at the municipalities themselves, but also just in the region, want to prioritize transit pedestrian infrastructure. So the things that we put out on the blue line and we're putting out on the purple line, we want to do on the red line as well. And then lastly is upgrading our fleet to deal with the demands that we have. We have crowding issues, and even with the 8-minute frequency, we still have crowding issues. So we're slowly but surely building up the fleet to go to 60-foot articulated buses. Those are basically the bendy accordion buses that you see on the bottom. Next slide. So, okay. So what is the upgrade? What's the purpose of it? Like I said, matching the red line to what we put in practice on the blue line, and will be putting in practice on the purple line. It's improving the overall experience for passengers, whether when they're walking to the stop, or they're actually waiting at the shelter itself. As I talked about, increasing the capacity, so that we can put even more people on the buses. And, overall, just continue to improve BRT. The best part about BRT is the fact that you can continuously make upgrades to it. Eventually, the ultimate upgrade, if this ever happens, I doubt it will, but the ultimate upgrade is getting it to become light rail. But between what we have now and light rail, there's a number of different improvements we can continue to make. So going back to the immediate upgrades that are occurring now, this is the funding that's in T137 currently, is going to upgrade the actual stations themselves. The biggest piece of that is going in and refreshing the shelters, putting in new branding panels. If you go by many of them, if you drive out today, you'll see they're faded, getting older, and need to be upgraded. But the biggest piece of it is actually the new amenities. So we have ability to heat our shelters now. We have the ability to have them be solar powered. Upgrading our pylons. That's the tall thing on the top left. Reason we need those upgrades is because that is what now powers the heated sidewalks. That's a big piece of it. So if you actually see the infrastructure that's happening, the biggest change you will see is the pylons get bigger, and there's now heated sidewalks in front of each one of the BRT stations. We rolled that out on certain stations on the blue line, extremely successful, as you could imagine. Makes it easier for ADA purposes, just makes it easier from a maintenance standpoint, because whenever there's snow or whenever a plow, the biggest piece is whenever a plow pushes a large amount of snow onto the sidewalk, it in a very short amount of time dissipates and goes away. Thank you. So then going back to what the really biggest piece of this is the upgrade to the actual infrastructure out and around the stations. We're doing this in multiple phases. We've somewhat talked about the Gateway Plaza Mobility Hub, which is something we've worked on with the city of Schenectady and Metroplex. That's really phase one. That's construction that's starting next year. Then is the design of the stations and the roadway in what I'm just saying is outer Schenectady. Just think of State Street, east of downtown Schenectady. Then looking at in the city of Albany, changes that can happen on Central Avenue in outer Albany. Think of that as west of Lark Street, and then downtown, and think of that as sort of east of Lark Street. The key part of each one of these segments, segment 2, segment 3, and then 3A and 3B, is the bus lane study that is wrapping up. And those specific locations had all been called out for some level of transit prioritization. Part of the study, we wanted to have bus lanes running, the entire lengths. Probably not going to be feasible, and Sandy can touch on that when we talk more about the bus lanes. But putting in queue jumpers, transit signal priority, more improvements to speed up the buses is definitely something that can happen. And so again, we have a large region. Just so happened that 3 segments are segments that are on the red line, and we can start to implement the recommendations of the bus lane study. So real quick with the Gateway Mobility Hub, this location, some of you, obviously Chris is one of them, but some of you have seen this before, so I'm going to go through it quickly. Location is in downtown Schenectady. It's at the location of the highest ridership bus stop in Schenectady County, the 9th most in our system. And obviously, once this is built, that'll probably move to probably 5th or 6th. It provides a significant amount of service. One is the Red Line Bus Plus line, the 10 local routes, including the new service that operates from Schenectady out to Montgomery County and Amsterdam. It also has, and we're accommodating intercity bus service by Trailways and Greyhound. And this is the site of the former Trailways site. It also includes portions of land owned by the county, public right of way on the street. And going back to the street is, what this shows is in the center there is the actual mobility hub. But we're making improvements to the surrounding roadways as well, not just the site where we're going to operate and where customers are going to get off and on the bus, but basically a block and a half of State Street and portions of Railroad Ave and South Church.
The rest wanted to say one thing was.
Yeah.
The gate, the Greyhound station, it's been there, was an eyesore in downtown. It's been there for decades. And we've been trying to remove it, and the owner would always tell us that the station was used, and that he needed it, and he would use this as a bargaining chip. But we got snow a particular day last year, and we went there to do a site visit, and it was 7 days after the snow, and all of the snow around the bus station was pristine. So we took I took a photo of it and sent it to some people. And then that became like an impetus for negotiations again, because he had to realize, he goes, okay, yeah, we don't use the building at all. So from that photo, and no one ever knew, because we don't do a study to see who's coming in and out of the building, but that photo led to Metroplex and all them having more leverage to get the building. And that was kind of the key that did all of this, was that getting that building gone, because now this is just such a more beneficial project to downtown without that building there.
Yeah, it's a great example of, I'll admit this, CDTA skill set is never going to be acquiring property, right? That's just not, it might be DOTs, it might be, Metroplexes. And this was a great partnership where what we do well is planning, design, and construction, right? And so great partnership in the sense that, Metroplex and the city taking the lead on getting the property, and then us coming in actually building the improvement. The amount of trailways, and this is part of the reason why the snow didn't have many footprints on it, is just the amount of intercity bus service is pretty limited. There's a few trips throughout the day, but the amount of bus service is, again, every 8 minutes just on one of those lines. There's 10 other lines, so there's probably a bus every 2 minutes coming to or from the location. Real quick on operational improvements. One, we're consolidating all of the bus services, whether you're heading eastbound, northbound, southbound, wherever direction, into one location. Requires more bays, so we're getting more bays on South Church Street. We're consolidating a few stops that are actually in the general area. We're getting an operator restroom, which is a huge benefit for us, just for the sheer amount of service. And most of this is at the end of drivers' lines. And a queue jumper on State Street. So literally part of the bus lane study and looking at the bus lane study is going to start to be implemented as part of the construction of this project. And then on the mobility enhancements, this is where we bring in all of our new mobility services. The biggest being car share, which we're calling Drive, and then bike share, which we're calling Cycle. Electric, we're adding electric vehicle charging stations, not only for the Drive vehicles, but for other vehicles. The biggest piece here of an improvement when it comes to pedestrians is, there is more, it's a better pedestrian environment overall than what's there today. But it is anywhere you walk from one end, you get off of one bus, you go to another bus, no matter where you're going to be on heated sidewalk. So if there is a storm, and I would love to say that the city or CDTA or Metroplex could shovel all of that space. We know that that's not going to happen. Heated sidewalks, it just makes it so any type of snowfall, you have a direct connection if you're traveling between buses. And then not really shown here, but the intersection that has the most amount of pedestrian traffic going to this site is the top corner there, Church and South Church and State Street. And that's going to be traffic calmed and improved for pedestrians crossing that road. So then phase 2 is what we're now currently starting to work with Chris on. And Chris, this might be an image that is new, but that's the meeting we're going to have that Megan set up for next week, where we start to look at these images. Before I forget, introducing Megan Quirk. She's our new senior planner. I think most people in the room have met have met Megan. But she is going to be the one shepherding along these projects throughout the design phase. So this is looking at outer Schenectady, which is the stations themselves. There's about 5 different stations up to the city line from the edge of downtown. So these will be, full roadway reconstructions in those areas. At the same time, though, we are going to be looking at the entire segment from downtown out to the city line for, I'm calling it a series of queue jumpers. We keep coming up with different names, smart corridors. We're going to come up with some term that sounds better than series of queue jumpers. But that is basically looking at all of the intersections along this stretch of roadway and what minor adjustments we can make, or some major adjustments we can make with putting in queue jumpers. And queue jumpers, just think of as mini small bus lanes at congested intersections. So just think of when I say queue jumper, really just think of mini bus lane. And putting them at strategic locations along the corridor where probably isn't, especially here, practical to put a bus lane the entire length. Even though we do have frequent service, every 8 minutes, with the local service, probably every 6 or 7, but it's not every 30 seconds. And we have different parts of the region where that's the case. So maybe not worth putting in full bus lanes, but putting in more queue jumpers. And again, wherever possible, we're going to incorporate the new mobility services that we have. So then the next area, which is not underway, because the phase 2 has we have a consultant on board. We're starting that process now. But the next phase after we move that along is in the city of Albany. 3A, that's the part west of Lark Street. That is going to be very similar in scope to what's happening in Schenectady. Improvements around the stations themselves, better pedestrian infrastructure. Again, this idea of a series of queue jumpers. And that one, the main difference though, is the partnership with the city. Obviously, they're doing a road diet on Central Avenue and have to partner on what that looks like for that segment of it. East of or west of Allen Street, beyond where the road diet is, that's something that will start the design of. We're hoping this year, but maybe potentially next year. 3B again is a little even further out, but that's looking at the roadway in downtown Albany, so lower Washington Avenue and State Street. Right now, the BRT, the Purple Line BRT, is making improvements to those areas, and also the pedestrian infrastructure there is pretty good. We don't see any major changes with ped infrastructure. So it's going to be more focused on the roadway itself and operations. And again, that's the series of queue jumpers idea. And then lastly is the articulated buses. We hope to, over time, there's about 24 buses currently on the line. What we're hoping to do, and it's already 8-minute frequency. Making even more frequent is going to be difficult, but what we want to do is to add capacity, add more articulated buses. So incrementally, we have 1 now. Under this, we're getting 6 more, but we're hoping incrementally over time to add more articulated buses. The biggest holdup for us with articulated buses is actually the space and the maintenance that's required for it. So if you go to our Schenectady garage, it is our oldest garage in the system. At some point, Jeremy Smith is going to come in, give a presentation on an expansion of that location, or potentially looking at a new site. Really, the biggest thing that holds us back is we've got a 1960s facility that we're cramming more and more buses into, and now we're talking about more and more bigger buses. But we hope over time that the entire fleet of Red Line buses is our TICs. The Purple Line, when they come in, all of those are our TICs, and our Albany garage was just upgraded to accommodate those. So that is what's the Red Line upgrade is. It's a multifaceted. What we're doing now to make it simple for everyone is having it all under one tip item. So when we get into the actual agenda item, it's basically the remaining money that's in RG 131 for this year which is the BRT set aside going into the upgrade that I just presented on. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions for Ross?
Good question. Do electric articulated buses exist?
They do. We're right now, we're piloting our current buses from one vendor. We're not at a point yet where we can say that we want to buy electric articulated buses. We eventually have to change all of our buses to electric, right? It's just the electric articulated market is very, very, very small. What we would imagine, because that last 4 is on the slide, we can't make that order until the spring of next year. We are probably going to put out an RFP soon for purchasing articulated buses overall, or sorry, purchasing electric buses overall. We just got the money at the last meeting we talked about for the Lono grant. Under that, we're going to add in electric articulated. Like right now, if you said we needed to purchase them currently, we wouldn't be ready to do that. It may be by next year, we'll know more information. That answers your question.
You said you had to purchase them. Is there a deadline?
So there is a mandate for 25% of the fleet by 2020. I should know this exact date. I don't know what it is, but there's a mandate for 25% of the fleet. That is we're going to be able to meet that infrastructure wise under the Lono grant. There's going to be, I guess what I'm saying, there's going to be continued mandates to go, and I need to stop saying electric, to zero emission. That may end up being hydrogen, that may be electric. There's a number of different options, and that's what we're looking into now. We're definitely going to have part of our fleet to meet zero emission is going to be electric. Really, the big question now in the industry is that makes sense? Is hydrogen the better choice? 6 months from now, there might be something else. We're trying to catch up with the technology and understand it.
Do you know how much of the bus commuters or whatever actually go between Albany and Schenectady?
Between the two downtowns,
I mean, even if the two municipalities, is there a lot, or is it just mostly up and down in the municipalities?
there's a good amount between it. The reason we know this is the loads, how full the bus is by West Mall, which is really the last, well, it is the last stop in the city of Albany. That's actually the point where the buses are at the highest capacity, really around Allen Street up at that point. That's people who are continuing to head west to Schenectady. Some are getting off at Colony Center, a little bit at the Village, a little bit in New Carter Road. But the buses are very, very full in the center of the line. What that means is there's still a lot of people traveling through. I don't know the exact percentages though.
This is curiosity, which is the heaviest bus volume? You said that was like 6 or something, or 9?
Oh, the biggest stop is Lark and Washington. Lark, I gotta stop calling it Lark Library Station, which is right near the intersection of Lark and Washington Avenue in the city of Albany. That is another good example of what we're doing at Gateway, where how the operations were set up is you had one stop here, one stop here, one stop here, one stop here, and they were all diffused. And now they're all centrally located in one spot. So that's our highest volume stop. And then second is on State and Lodge, which is basically State Street in downtown Albany.
Okay, all set.
Thank you.
Michael, Lodge Administration, previous meeting minutes, October 5th, 2022. Can I have a motion to approve those?
So
Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Randy. All those in favor? Aye. Unopposed? All right, motion passes. On to B, draft performance and expenditure report. I'm assuming that's. Yeah.
It's me. I'm not gonna go through this in detail, but and we don't have to take an action on this report, but I did want to just share with you
A lot of the latter part of the agenda will be kind of going through some of the planning work that we have done over this last 6 months, in some cases longer than that. But you know, this basically summarizes the last 6 months of planning work here at CDTC. So if there's a topic that you're interested in, feel free to peruse the document. You know, as you guys know, a lot of our time has been spent on building the transportation improvement program and the public outreach needed for that. Our staff has been busily working on a number of consultant-led initiatives, ranging from the Troy Federal Street Corridor Study to the City of Rensselaer's Waterfront Connectivity Study. Most of these studies are in various points in their progress. We're spending quite a bit of time maintaining and updating our regional travel demand model, doing data collection. We have the Smart Communities Toolbox project is about to wrap up. These are all projects that we'll be presenting at future meetings. And within the document, which we tried to reformat to make it easier to read, just to show you an example of the layout. We have the topic area, our goal, and then sort of the bullet list of all the accomplishments with the expenditures. Because this is what Federal Highway and FTA is really interested in, is where the federal money is going and how we're spending it. So just wanted to share that with you quickly. And do you have any questions about that? Okay. Thanks. That's it.
Moving on. Okay. Tip fiscal constraint summary table 4, is that gonna be?
That would be Jacob.
There you go. So we are currently within our fiscal constraint boundaries. We are under programmed in the current fiscal year 2023. One thing to point out, though, this table where we're showing 37% under programmed, this is still technically the old tip, so we haven't brought in all of the new projects that we approved for the 2022-27 tip. So we're actually, the starting point for the new tip is about 4.8% under program. So we're still under programmed, not by that amount.
And last we heard the state tip would be looking at early December.
Early December, it moved.
Yeah,
Thought it was November.
30 day. Yeah, I figured it would. The 30-day, there's a 30-day public review that ends next week. This week, and then commences the 30-day FTA review. Maybe they don't take the whole 30 days, but that wraps up early December, and there's issues, it'll take a little longer. If there's no issues, it'll just go live.
You can't start any of your projects until the stick. Right?
Correct.
Right, except,
Well,
except.
yeah, we did adopt a 22 tip, even though it's not in the statewide one. So if you have a phase that you want to get going prior to December and it's in the new tip, you can bring that phase in and we can obligate it before December. You just put it on the old stip in this year. I refer to it as the twilight zone. The tip's approved, but not the stip, but so you can bring anything in because it's approved.
Can you put that in the bullet and send it to?
Sure. If you have a page you want to start.
No, I say that, I say it jokingly now, but it's always a question when we start going to say with it for us within departments or something and looking at different projects that are on the tip. And when can I go out? When can I start, you know?
If you start your process now, the tip will be live, the stip will be live by the time you need the authorization. Correct. You can start now.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Does the step need to be finalized before the new year?
Should have been finalized October 1, but
Yeah.
we're not.
I know, but is there an absolute by date that it has to be?
No,
I don't, they work on different fiscal, right? So.
Right, but we, for a calendar
this is,
year.
it's supposed to be October 1. This is,
We're already 2 months in.
we're already, so. we're just really- Ooh, excuse that.
Like being a little more pregnant.
Sure is up there. Yeah. That's why we're here.
All right, Moving on, right, action items. This is the two related to Ross's presentation. Are we taking them as one?
Ross, did you wanna?
Yeah. Yeah, basically it's, take them as one because it's a drawdown of the set aside and then putting that money into T-137. And again, that is for red line upgrades, which is what I just presented on.
So we can take them as one. So for a motion to approve, RG-131, bus rapid transit implementation.
I'll make a motion to approve the award-winning BRT project, recent recipient of the Erastus Corning II Achievement Award for any municipal corporation. The BRT line.
Do I have a second? Is that Andy? Andrew? All right, any further discussion?
It's not a conflict of interest in that motion. No. I don't know whatsoever.
All right, roll call. All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Okay, right along. CDTC ADA solicitation, that would be.
Gary is going to describe this to the group. And let me just get this shared for the audience at home. Not at home and the remote office. Okay, go ahead, Karen.
Right, so we solicited for municipal participation in the ADA self-analysis and transition plans project in August and September. We received 4 applications. So, each municipality has widely ranging complexities of pedestrian infrastructure. So looking at the amount of pedestrian infrastructure in each of those municipalities, we are pretty sure that we're going to be able to fund 3 of those under the contract that we're signing now for a consultant to work on the project. So because of that, we evaluated all 4 of the applications, and the table here shows the 4 that we received: the Village of Baldwin Spa, Town of Clifton Park, Gilderland, and the City of Troy, and with the average scores that each received. So we're recommending funding the top 3 scorers, which is Baldwin Spa, Gilderland, and Troy. But because we're not certain, how much money basically we're going to need for each of them, we're proposing to hold the Clifton Park fund because we still may be able to do that later this year.
Any questions? So this is an action item. No questions, and can I have a motion to, I guess, approve the evaluation committee's recommendation of the 3 municipalities that we're looking for?
Yeah.
I'll move it. Do I have a second? On us. Okay. Any discussion? Roll call. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Staying? Motion carries. Bridge, New York, is that?
Yeah, I guess we'll at least start the conversation.
Has to this way.
We brought paper. I brought.
Yeah, it's the same one I sent.
Okay. It's up.
Thank you. I was like, is he gonna give us the number? You know, I should probably be aware, since the inception of the Bridge New York program. Former governor, it had been a statewide competitive solicitation process that engaged. The County Highway Superintendents Association and others. It were involved in, a massive endeavor. Through several iterations, the comments had come up that it may be better to go through more traditional program funding, similar that we do around the table here, that it not be a competitive solicitation, that it is done as traditional core sort of funds, and it gives us more flexibility, particularly in terms of the cap nature of, like we've talked about for other programs. If there's $100 million in Bridge New York program, that has its own specific
Procurement record.
with the comptroller's office. That's why we call those capped. There is no more money in that program. It's only got that X number down. If it's programmed this way as core sort of funds and it comes through the MPO tables and then DOT in the rural counties, that it gives some more flexibility. So I think across the board, there's satisfaction amongst that. And I know the MPO directors have had some separate conversations that like the idea that it's sort of more locally held now, this money. But a couple sort of caveats that were left in, both from conversations with the County Highway Superintendent's Association and the Association of Towns and Villages, was that there would at least be a recipient in each county across the state. So this, and this, what Greg had passed out, a sort of floor funding level for each county was established based upon the square deck footage and the deficient deck footage, right? They're all based on
Local owned bridges.
of local owned bridges. So that's where you see those allocations had come up, which represent essentially half of the 5-year program that was announced by the governor. So ideally, in a couple of years, we'd be looking at another $14 million there. DOT will be issuing sort of a, it was a statewide bridge, local bridge conference out in Syracuse last week that this was talked about. Likely with it next week, we'll be issuing some sort of announcement letter of the program, how it's changed, and that it's now going to be going through the MPOs and DOT process. We've had some conversations here about the evaluation criteria, keeping it relatively simplistic and consistent with the evaluation criteria that was used under the previous program. So I don't know, at some point there'll be a.
Yeah, we have a separate
Okay.
discussion. Did you want to
I
talk
don't-
about culverts too, or?
Yeah. Yeah, so the culvert program, that's state funds, so. You know, we want to make everyone aware through every channel we can, but, the region will be managing the 8-county culvert solicitation. Ourselves, although we're gonna ask for local sponsors to assist in the scoring, there's a recommendation to get a county, the town to be on the scoring committee, so we'll be looking for assistance there across the 8 counties, but you know, in the 8 counties, there's 15 million of culvert funds that are available.
And, you know, with resiliency initiatives now, basically the capacity is increased by 50% of each of these culverts. Most of them end up becoming anything of any size. That issue is, it ends up becoming a bridge at the end of the project, most likely, but it's eligible for culvert. It starts a culvert, it's eligible for culvert funds. That will be a singular solicitation for the region for those ones, with the bridge ones being broken down between, at least for region 1, the 2 MPOs and the 2 rural counties. So it's about generic.
What you're ultimately saying is that it starts as a culvert, but becomes a bridge.
It applies a culvert.
It draws from the culvert.
Draws from the culvert, correct.
Yeah, so apply as a culvert, and in the end, when it's a bridge, then it's now a bridge. And
So I don't know what the word would be, as redundant as it is, the top table just to say is Bridge New York Bridge funding.
Right.
I might clarify that because it's not, Bridge New York includes culverts, so the total funding through the program is actually the 14.12 plus the 15.4, right?
Right, yeah.
So the Bridge New York Bridge funding will go as here, then that little asterisk, does that belong over by Saratoga County?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some may go to Moreau,
Yeah,
okay.
depending on what. Basically something from our own.
And the 1.5 million, I think. was
That's the ceiling,
minimum
that's the
per
floor,
county. That's the floor.
Yeah.
So
that's the minimum we can get,
that's,
or the maximum.
that's the
minimum,
maximum,
whatever.
right?
Well,
With
so
some wiggle room.
there's some. They wanted to divide up all the money by county, and we suggested that they leave some to the region to round out whole project budgets. So they left us 10% across the 8 counties, so we have 2.7 million to, you know, say the family of projects in Albany County comes to 2.7 million. we can dip into this reserve and make a whole project. You know what I mean? We don't. we do-
2.7. I brought this up at the conference. Because my concern is they were talking about how New York City is gonna get their full 5-year allocation because they're essentially a monolithic decision maker, so why screw around, and give them all the money? But, and not that it really has a bearing on it, I guess, for this round, but like, for instance, Schenectady, the city of Schenectady, the project that we just finished, that was a $2.1 million project. So with the city, with Schenectady only getting 1.5, the whole county, and that's where I was just thinking, like, if, you know, I'm shocked. Rensselaer must have a whole lot more bridges than I thought. I wish Joe was here to say, yeah,
But these are all
But-
locals, rural bridges.
all rural. Yeah.
This is category.
Yeah, so Joe's gotta be.
Yeah.
It's
Everybody,
probably why, you know, the county didn't apply for the core funds, because they probably hadn't thought that this was coming. You can interpret this many ways, remembering that this is 2.5 years of a 5-year funding program, so essentially they're gonna get. County will likely get
It's the same
12 to
formula.
$14 million.
Yeah.
Check,
It's the same formula.
assuming the same formula applies, so, you know, you can interpret that however you'd like,
yeah,
but.
I just wanted to point, that's where I was, at the meeting, I was more advocating for the smaller people, the people that were gonna get the 1.5 million, because. I didn't know how it would rule out a bigger project. If you had a $2.5 million project, you'd be like, wait, whereas if you applied for it under the old program, you might have gotten the funding. So, but that's good that you have a set aside, and I already got my $2 million project, so I guess I snuck in under the old rules. But,
Well, I'm remembering you're, you know, within county, this is not, you know, that there are multiple sponsors within county, right? So there is still a little bit of a decision-making process that needs to happen within each county to allocate these dollars, which is where CDTC is starting to come in.
the other thing I pointed out too, was Jim, what's the guy's name, Flynn, was it James?
Jim Flynn, yeah.
So I pointed out to him was that, I mean, it's going to be good for Rensselaer, but at the same point, for instance, in Schenectady, I pointed out that I literally this year had every contractor that exists in the capital district in Schenectady working, you know, so it's like you have to spend, because he was making a very big point about spending the money and the commissioner's goal to spend the money. So they have, 5 years to spend $14 million. So it's like, all right, better hop on your horse and get going, because that's a lot of projects all of a sudden to go from no federal projects, because you really didn't apply for any around the table, to, could be quite a few.
Is this a guaranteed? That's not guaranteed. Is this a statement though, that this is 50% now? And 50% in the same allocation will follow?
Let's
So in
see.
other words, you could put a big project on. Knowing that there are funds to follow?
Are you talking about knowing that
Right,
these
you
funds
had
are
you
coming
had a
in?
$12 million bridge, just picking a number, can you apply for the full allocation? That's a DOT question.
Am I on your good side today or the left side? Okay. The Mets didn't play Boston Caps.
They're both golf. Is it capped the same way
These aren't capped.
for the?
Yeah, you
amount
said they weren't
of the
capped.
Projects.
I
I know
didn't know.
the total funding, but I don't know.
I mean, we can only award. We can only award what the region is given right now. But if you,
You know that I'm giving you a question that's gonna come to me
yeah,
when I go back.
I know, it's tough to answer that. We can only give you 3.3 and maybe some more out of the reserve now.
But if that's the highest rated project, and it's one to be out in year 4 or 5, we could certainly work on incorporating that. I'd be a little more, I'd be skeptical if you had a culvert that was the same thing. I
Oh,
really
yeah,
can't
yeah.
commit state funds out year 4 and 5. But the continuity of the federal highway program, we should have those conversations, and if that is the highest rated candidate.
And again, I'm just
We
thinking
work
about
to
a
get it
what
all
if
in.
question.
No. That's why you mentioned Chip. I mean, that's part of this, that they're not administering the program. That it's not being done by main office structures, that it's being brought into the region, that hopefully. I was a little surprised. I mean, there's 160 bridges in the 8 counties that comprise Region 1 that are owned by towns or villages, which was a much higher number than I thought it was going to be. So it's great that there's 30 million more dollars here, but like anything, they need is going to be greater than the resources that are.
The other thing they said was that, of just say Rensselaer gets a $1 million award and they leave some in there, that unlike under the old program, this, you can allocate some more out of the pot. It's not capped.
Right, it would be a decision at this table.
Right, you would be able to make the decision, whereas my Bridge New York project, luckily it didn't go over, but it did go over, that's a local fund that I hadn't put in there. So that's something. And then I did talk to her about, to Diane and Jim about, I have a Crane Street project that's going on. All right, but going on design, we haven't even started it, but if the design were to come back and it would just say, right now it's in for a major bridge preservation, we're taking all the pre-stressed out. If they were to come back in a year or two after the design and say that I need more funding to do something, I might be able to go into this pot and pull money instead of the other pots. And they did say that that supplemental funding to complete a bridge that is underfunded would be considered. So that's another, I'm just, because they didn't like, I had a lot of questions about accounting. I would talk to them about swapping funds. They didn't like that. Like if you said, this is just another pot, so if you took the money out of Bridge New York and then you swapped it with an SDP or you did something like that, because now it's just a pot. But they thought the goal of the program was to, complete local system bridges and not to do some kind of a crazy accounting thing, so.
Ideally, it would have been better if we had gotten this money prior to the program.
Sure.
It could have just been woven into it.
Right.
We wouldn't even need these sort of conversations. It just would have been a bigger pot in here. So for that same reason, I think we'll continue to massage this as it goes forward. Whatever the next tip update is, I think that the targeted program funds would just be within that, as opposed to doing a separate solicitation, which we're just doing because there's this 2.5 years worth of money that's waiting there now to get programmed. Is there a schedule?
So that's part of what we're still talking with the region about, but I think today, we're gonna walk through our proposed evaluation process and get your reaction and hopefully approval of that or a modified version of it. At this point, it appears that the department's going to be issuing a letter that's going to go to bridge owners first. Do you have a timing of when that's going to go out?
Next week.
Next week.
We'll get those out.
So we'll wait to our policy board meeting in December to kind of have them bless the process. And then at that point, we'll make sure that everything's out on the street for you folks to apply. Some of the questions you raised today and clarification, we'll work with the region to kind of develop some guidance, documentation for you all. And then we'll have the submissions come in early, end of December, early January. Try to keep this simple. We'll do the evaluation in-house because like we said, we're going to have hopefully a simplified evaluation process, and then we'll bring recommendations to the February committee and then the subsequent March policy board. That's sort of the rough schedule.
So what's the action?
The
Are we
action
approving
today?
this table?
Well, I'll make it to the second part of our little conversation, which is the methodology for evaluating these projects. So,
Can I throw a corollary to the what if?
sure.
Just a quick one.
Yep.
Because if this goes and says the other half is rolled into tip update, then it's open for everybody. There's no proportions, there's no set amount. There's an amount that goes in, but it's not allocated to individual.
It depends on how the main office writes the rules. They may still have the mandate that if there's an amount set aside by county and it's for local bridges, that we would just have to pull that into the broader tip update. I think what they're implying is that if you do have something that's a little more than the base, then we have some more play with other fund sources.
I mean, the idea is to put this in local hands. I'd say that it's not going to be overprescribed. In terms of the upstate MPOs, ours is a little, a lot more complicated with 4 counties. Most of the other upstate MPOs there's a single dominant sort of county, whether you're from rural. So, yeah. So it's.
That means
not-
our region's healthier.
It's certainly there are more people at the table.
Yeah.
And, but that's the idea. I mean, it's intended to be, some sort of programmatic way to roll this money into the program. But then going forward, it's just part of the bridge funds that are allocated to us, not an overprescribed program. I think they want to get away from that.
Yeah, it's unwieldy. The solicitation process really is lengthy and unwieldy for all involved, and the application, for simplified application. That's
All right, so Sandy, you want to explain our
Yeah, so, everybody around this table knows our traditional scoring process. Andrew and Jacob have worked on, a proposed alternative for this program. So Andrew, I'll let you kind of walk through your concept.
Sure. We're proposing to have these three main criteria, which add up to 100 points: the facility importance, the condition, and then a merit/qualitative score at the end. This is largely based on the step one quantitative review that was done for the prior Bridge New York solicitation back in 2021. But it also has some elements of the tip update scoring process that we use. But as Sandy mentioned, we tried to streamline this so that we could do it on a quicker timeline. So we have 40 points available for the facility importance. This is going to be computed in much the same way we did for the tip update, where we use the CDTC travel demand model and then that will give each bridge a score that's a function of not just the bridge AADT and not just the detour length, but all the available detours for the bridge. So that score is actually a dollar value, the bridge value per year as estimated by the travel demand model, and then we'll scale that to 40 points. Another 40 points are available for the bridge condition. We propose to do this very simply. We just use the computed condition rating from the most recent bridge inspection report for that bridge. That falls on the 1 to 7 score, although there are very few bridges that are, below a 2 or a 2.5. So if you scroll down just a bit, Sandy, there's another little table here. We propose that if the bridge has a condition 3 or below, that it receives a full 40 points, and bridges in better condition receive fewer points. And then the remaining 20 points for the merit and qualitative scores, we chose 4 of the merit categories from the tip evaluation that are relevant to bridges, for which bridges, scored a variety of points. So we have 5 points available for each of the merit bullets, 5 points for complete streets, which you get points if you add or maintain a sidewalk on the bridge or a multi-use trail. 5 more points for the importance to freight movements. And yeah, if you look at the second and third pages of the handout, you can see the explanations for that. 5 points for security and resiliency, and then the last 5 points for equity EJ. And for those categories, we're scoring them very much the same way as we did for the tip evaluations. So that's full 100 points.
So, the idea here is, this will also be sort of a pilot for as we rethink how we evaluate tip projects here. Bridges are kind of a unique creature. So we felt it was appropriate to kind of simplify things, take some pieces out of this evaluation that frankly bridges just don't score points on. So why should we be spending our time, doing a lengthy evaluation for components for which they don't get points? But it still maintains the balance between what the state is looking for and the CDTC approach of maintaining the value of the facility, detour length, and what have you. So that's our proposal. And do you have any questions about this?
There's still a possibility of this being a local and rural, that some of these bridges can lose out on 10 points automatically, either through EJ or through complete street standards.
It depends, because some rural areas have EJ low income populations, so it depends on where the location is in the region.
But there won't be any complete street aspect to most likely.
Oh, complete component can be as simple as a wider shoulder than what's there today. It doesn't have to be a bike lane, it doesn't have to be, you know, most bridge projects that I've observed at least are widening them out enough to fit either some extra shoulder length, and in some cases adding sidewalks, it depends on the location. So there is a way to score points, is fine.
I think just like the traditional program update, this would still produce a list for us that would either go to the infrastructure task force or to the planning committee body. It was just like the exercise, we do a program update. Here's the top 20, and based on the numbers and the floors, you know, there's a couple different alternatives, and ultimately this will be our.
How are you guys evaluating culverts? You have a matrix like this, I mean, this is just bridge. And then the region's doing the culverts.
Good committee, right?
Getting the committee was having,
What is it gonna be around, then? Is
similar.
it gonna be similar, or is it gonna be just the region, like internally?
no, we're gonna ask for some municipal participants in the
Okay.
committee. for the Scoring. We're still working on the scoring. There's less information on colors available, so it's gonna be an even simpler scoring process.
It wouldn't just be that, county saying the importance to it.
Yeah, that's what
I mean, rather than having a matrix, just saying,
It's gonna be
we
boiled
know what
down.
it is.
It's gotta be boiled down if we know we're gonna have more candidates than money. So we do need something dependable.
wasn't historically, you got a lot of culvert applications compared to bridges, was that it? I thought the volume of culvert applications was more than bridge applications.
I think compared to the funding, yeah, it's way more.
Okay.
Any further questions? So you're looking for action to approve what the funding targets and the evaluation criteria that
Yeah,
that staff has
basically.
put forward?
Yep.
Yeah, and I have a motion to that.
I'm gonna move.
Is that moved by Chris? Is that a second by Brandon? Any further discussion? I'll go.
For the record, I did leave a voicemail. Just listen. This conversation may be of interest to them. It was individually contacted.
Any further discussion? Roll call, in favor, aye. Anyone opposed, abstain, motion carries. We're into discussion items, right?
Great, thank you. So because, you know, we didn't have a ton of action items today. We thought we would take the remainder of the meeting and provide some updates on some of the planning activities. And some upcoming initiatives that would be of interest to the group. So to begin with, our staff did some data collection to analyze sort of pre and post-COVID traffic volume in the region. And put together a summary report that Andrew and Pam are going to give a little overview on today. So let me get your PowerPoint up and running. Screen. Let them walk through. I think you'll find the data pretty interesting when you think about the range of roadway types we have in the region.
Okay, hi everyone, it's me again. So for the regional traffic trends, you can go ahead and advance to the first slide. A little bit of background, we've been trying to keep an eye on the impact that COVID has had on all modes of transportation in the region since March of 2020. And I used to have a little slide deck that I showed the planning committee and many of our other committees. But I eventually stopped taking that show on the road because most of the data sources we were looking at suggested that regional VMT had returned to normal around spring of 2021. National sources were suggesting probably around March 2021. And some of the local sources pictured here on the right is data that we just got access to from Replica. And that data source as well suggests that just for our 4-county region, regional VMT may have returned to its pre-COVID baseline around spring 2021 as well. However, anecdotally, everyone was telling us it feels like things have shifted on a lot of roads around the region. Even if regional VMT is back to normal, anecdotally, people have been telling us things have changed either by which roads are being used or by the time of day that these roads are being used. So we've been keeping our eye on a number of these big data vendors who publish reports, kind of region scale reports, INRIX, Streetlights, Google Mobility, Apple Maps, a number of other sources. They've been suggesting some interesting things have been happening nationally. They suggest that there are fewer downtown trips or urban core central business district trips now than there were before, and a corresponding increase in suburban trips. They're suggesting that there are fewer commuters to offices in some sectors, especially tech-heavy sectors. Fewer transit trips, although I think our region is faring better than some of the other cities I've seen around the country. I think last I heard, CDTA was up to about 90% or more of pre-COVID baseline. These sources are suggesting less AM peak travel, but more midday travel. So the time of day curve is shifting a bit, and it's more of a flatter curve rather than the traditional two-humped camel that we used to see. Rise in local deliveries with the corresponding rise in e-commerce. Fewer trips to medical facilities due to telehealth, and some continuing work from home and school from home that's lingering even to this day. So the question we wanted to get at is, these trends were noticed nationally. What's happening specifically here in our region? So if you flip to the next slide. So beginning late last fall, we began a consultant-led data collection study. We hired Quality Counts LLC to do a number of counts throughout the region for a variety of purposes to support our ongoing planning studies. But we also commissioned a number of counts specifically to get to the heart of this question: what is the long-term lasting impact of COVID on traffic in the region? So we selected a number of locations, some of which to support local planning studies, but other locations we chose around offices, colleges and universities, new developments, healthcare facilities, places where we expect COVID may have had a lasting shift on traffic in that area. So pictured here on the map, you can see the 50 volume, the two counts we did are marked in blue. For these, we have volume and vehicle classification and speed data as well. And we also did 13 turning movement counts as well. And the counts were spread out all across the 4 counties. And once the 2 counts were completed, we reached out to DOT and we requested the most recent pre-COVID data they had at the same locations. We could use that as a baseline for comparison. And very helpfully, DOT provided us with good prior data at 45 of the 50 locations. So we began doing, Chaim took the lead on this. We did before and after analyses at each location to determine how traffic has shifted from 2019 or earlier to the more recent counts. Most of these blue dots were done in April 2022. So if you flip to the next slide, Chaim prepared a 2-page memo that's part of the agenda. You can see it on our website. Here are some of the 4 highlights from the memo. These are general trends we noticed when we looked at collections of counts that all serve the same facilities. So on roadways serving office complexes, somewhat surprisingly, we noticed that daily traffic volumes declined on average 40% compared to the pre-COVID baseline data that we were provided. So this suggests that many of the offices may have some lasting work from home policies. Many of the offices we counted at were kind of tech-centered industries. But we know that certain sectors of the state government might have some work from home policy that remains as well. And because of that, the daily volumes were down by 40%, and the peak hour volumes were similarly down by about 50%. On roadways serving colleges and universities, daily traffic declines by a lesser amount, but still a significant 12%. More notably, peak hour volumes were down 17%. So this suggests that a lot of classes went online in March of 2020. Some of those classes may be remaining online even to this day, as colleges and universities maybe realize this might be more convenient, might save us some money. So the school from home may be continuing at a lot of colleges and universities. For counts that were either on our freight priority network or were otherwise important freight links, we saw a decline in overall vehicle traffic of about 10% and a similar decline in the peak hour volume of 14%. However, these locations saw a roughly 30% increase in the number of trucks, and this may be attributable to more local deliveries occurring now. There was a big shift to e-commerce due to COVID. A lot more local delivery trucks and vans are out today than even just a few years ago. That may account for some of this increase. And finally, throughout the region, we did notice the kind of peak shaving effect that was suggested by many of the independent data sources. Most of the count locations that we saw, rather than having a distinct AM and then a distinct PM peak, had kind of this midday plateau. And in some locations, the peak hour was no longer the traditional 5 to 6, but it was a little earlier in the day as a result. So importantly, I want to note, this is a small sample size. It's tough to draw very strong conclusions. We only did one count at each location. So we'd very much like to continue to collect data and continue to analyze and see what the lasting shift COVID has had. So I'll turn things over to Chaim. He prepared kind of a before and after fact sheet for each count location.
Okay, so for each of those counts that we had before 2019 count from NISTA, we created this report template. It has the name of the segment, the roadway classification, the pre-count average annual daily total number, the peak hour and the peak volume from that count, and then the percent changes for those two numbers. And then at the bottom, each report has a time of day graph, which shows the hourly volumes for the pre-count and post-count. And it is very helpful for seeing that distribution change from like the AM peak, PM peak to that flatter, but it's also not present in all the counts, so it's a helpful visualization. This specific count is on Washington Ave, just east of Albany, so it's one of those college university counts that we classified. As you can see, there's a around 20% change in volume, similar to that 12%. And also that difference in the peak hour volume change, like I said, of the planning peak is, although it is much higher than the total volume. On the next slide is just another example of one of these reports. Like I said, it's on the link on the agenda website. Is you can see all of them, but just at the end of the memo. But so this is, you can see the AADT is around 6,000, so much lower than that previous one. And here we see an increase in traffic, which is what we're seeing regionally and nationally. The peaks generally are staying the same, but also they're not getting peakier, I guess you can say. They're kind of, at most we're seeing the same AM PM peak. We're not seeing more dramatic changes in that AM.
And this location item is Rensselaer
That
County's
thing-
Route 9.
Yeah, it's Skoda, I'm sorry.
So what's interesting about that location is that that's not far from the Amazon distribution facility. So it's just interesting to note that because there's a user that pumps a lot of vehicles on the roadway system, you didn't see as many changes there,
This is at exit 11.
more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like for employees, it could be employment center that doesn't have work from home, so it's only 6,000 ADT. There's less people going on it that would change the traffic patterns. And then before we go on to the next slide, I just want to say that if your municipality has counts that you've done recently, or you have a developer that's done counts recently, we're happy to compare it to pre-COVID counts if you want to send it to us, especially if it's somewhere where New York State DOT has a station from a free count. It'll be easier for us to compare, and we'll be happy to create a report or send it back to you and show you what we've done.
Question, what was the length of your data collection? How long were you collecting?
Most of the counts were done throughout April of this year, 2022. Some of them were done a little earlier to support ongoing planning studies, so a little bit of the data is from last fall, but most April 2022.
You're getting like a month snapshot then?
Right, yeah.
And
I
there,
think the counts for most of it's like 72 hours.
Yeah.
I think that was like.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. 3-day counts.
and the ADTs were factored for seasonality, so their New York State DOT has a seasonality factor for the month and the type of roadway that it is. So those numbers have been normalized.
That 9 and 20 corridor even is very surprising, because I mean, that's my route. I haven't had a traffic problem on the patrol in 2.5 years, and that was before that 8 years of stopping for a half mile every day.
Yeah.
Same thing with 77. So Amazon's probably the only answer, and they're probably an off shift time. They get in at 7 or they get in at 10. Because the traffic is remarkably down.
Yep.
It's got my commute in half.
And this is where, and we'll continue on, but we're gonna continue this on-demand count program. And if you have locations like that in your neighborhood, in your community, where you say, I really would be interested to know what's going on.
Yep, we're starting an on-demand data collection contract soon. Teresa is the project manager for that. If you have locations of interest where you feel there might have been a shift, or you feel we might be interested in the data for any reason, please contact Teresa and we'll see if we can squeeze an account at that location. And then as before, we'll compare it to pre-COVID data and see what the shift is. As Ian mentioned, if you do any traffic impact studies or local planning studies of any kind, if you just send us the data, we'd be happy to add it to our database. We don't want to count somewhere if there's already been a very recent local count, but we also want to build out our database of counts and do more of these little analyses in the future. So that was all for me. Is there any remaining questions?
I was just wonder what's the impact on planning for this intersection needs a roundabout, this intersection needs this improvement if, particularly if it's one of those areas where, the volume's down.
I mean, there could be a number of implications of this information. If you're in a location where the peaking is no longer the same and you're a planning board member and you're doing a traffic study for your development, and they're only looking at that traditional peak hour, that might not be the right thing to do anymore. So it could lead to a rethink of even some of those traditionally engineering accepted practices if these patterns continue, and we're going to continue to monitor them. But I think it's something that community planning boards certainly need to be aware of. I know the department is monitoring how that impacts the analysis of projects that you just described. We'll see what the long-term changes are, but I think and you can tell by this office building we're sitting in, those of you who've been around for a long time, I've seen our parking lot. I don't think that insurance company is coming back upstairs. So what does that mean for office buildings like this, where you have a particular type of business that might not ever come back? Wolf Road is not the same Wolf Road right now. It's definitely heading in the direction it was pre-COVID, but it's still not quite to where it was before. So, we're seeing these visual changes, these anecdotal changes. We're hoping that this continuous monitoring of the traffic, and again, bike and ped counts too, because we also saw during COVID an increase in bike and ped activity. So we want to make sure we get user counts on the bike and ped activity as well, to see if those are long-term trends.
The couple previous slides where you said that, peak is reducing by a certain percentage, but what really caught me is that the 30% increase in the number of it's in the number of trucks.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're balancing your travel load throughout the day. I'd really like to see how that is in another year.
Yeah.
To see whether it increases, and if so, to your point, engineering for traffic changes, because now you have a constant rather than the peak.
You have different peaks, but overall AADT is down, right?
Regionally, at least in the sample we had, was
Yeah.
what, down 12%?
Nationally, some data sources were suggesting VMT is a little higher than it was in 2019. Our data sources say it's pretty much the same or maybe slightly higher regionally.
AADT is higher.
The total regional VMT.
Okay. Is it?
And I think it's because the work from home folks are taking more local trips midday.
Yeah.
Running to.
I've got
Running an
some
errand.
data here. This is Clifton Gardens, for example, instead of that peak that you typically see. Oh, sure,
Just one way.
there it is. Instead of that AM peak, you see in an established neighborhood, it ramps up at 11 AM right through 5 PM. And we've collected data all summer that's showing that AM commute's just not there, that we used to see those two humps that Andrew mentioned.
We'd love to see that if you'd be willing to
We
share it with
collected
us.
all summer, so I've got a lot of neighborhood
That's great.
data from two speed trailers that we have dark that actually collected data of just the vehicles and speeds, and we've definitely seen that change. The midday is really more congested than the AM commutes now.
The afternoon has remained relatively the same.
Afternoons staying the same right about till 7 PM because I think people get home and then go back out with evening trips. Sometimes bringing kids to different things. But we're finding that especially some of our older neighborhoods like Clifton Knolls, Clifton Gardens, they have less of an AM commute because of that aging population too. So we're seeing that correlation is definitely very different than the pre-COVID charts, which I have those. So I'll put them in a Dropbox and share those.
Great.
Yeah,
Do you find a corollary with the reduction in hours of retail? They're more, a lot of them have become more concentrated, whereas others have existed, 24 hours, 24/7. Now
I don't know if we looked at that detail, Andrew, when we
We
were.
we didn't look at the number of hours
Yeah,
that the retail.
but that's a fair point.
So you're focusing the ability to access places more in the noon hours.
No one wants to get up early. If you
No,
don't
not
have to
me.
get up early, why would you get up early? I don't have any idea.
Engineers still get up.
The only thing I
Sandy, I
wonder
just got-
if nobody wants to.
I had one too. Is there any, I missed some of it, but I don't think I had something, but, I just, the correlation with the new drivers not loving driving like the old drivers. I'm just saying, like my father-in-law, and my father, and even me, just so, I'm on the brink of this. The idea of you get a car and you go for a drive, right? And that's gone. Like in the commercials, if you see for a new car, they're talking about like what's in the car, right? The touchscreen, the Apple Play. I know people that don't even know what the motor is in their car now. They just know that the car moves. So like, I'm just saying, so is that in any of these? Like the fact is, as our younger population gets older and drives, they don't really like to drive, so they don't do it as much. Is that, I would have to imagine that just overall, that number is gonna slowly go down as baby boomers don't drive, because I know people, they're just not getting licenses. They don't care to drive.
I haven't seen that addressed in any of the kind of the national reports that I've
Mhm.
seen, so that could be a component of it is
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was,
age of driver, yeah.
it's definitely something that,
Bicycle, Pedestrian,
Got an aging population too.
Right.
Yeah.
People drive less as you get older.
I drive
Leave,
less.
or certainly not
I
driving.
hope they
peak
would.
hours.
So, all of these questions that you're raising and the data that we're collecting is going to feed into our regional transportation plan update to some degree. And, when we think about the planning implications and what does this mean for peak hour travel and these other things, it'll give us some more data to kind of back up whatever the policy choices we're putting into our long-range planning. Because I think things are going to continue to evolve and change. We have yet to see what happens with the state employees. I hear there's a contract renegotiation happening. I'm hearing that there's gonna be a work from home component embedded in that contract, so there may not be the same workforce commutes.
Yeah.
And as you guys know, our three largest employers are under one of which is the state of New York. If they're not commuting regularly to downtown Albany, to the Harriman campus, even here to Wolf Road, what does that mean for our regional travel picture? So, these are definitely things and questions we'll keep monitoring and,
Well, to Chris's point, you also have to factor in the cost of fuel.
Yep.
A cheap trip is a lot different than an expensive one, so the ability just to go out and travel is gonna be curtailed by that first element.
All right, moving right along. All right,
That's still money.
Complete Streets Design Guide, is that? Yeah.
that will be Carrie. So this is a project that we've had in our work plan for a number of years, and we're at a point where we have completed it. So she's going to just give me a very quick overview of. Carrie.
Okay, next slide. So I wanted to just remind those of you who've been here for a little while and the history of this, because it has been a while. It was a recommendation in New Visions 2040, which we had from 2015. And it is something that the Complete Streets Advisory Committee really took up and worked on. Beginning by reviewing a whole bunch of other design guides from around the country related to complete streets. And that committee guided the framework for the document and the content that we wanted to include in it. The guidebook really kind of summarizes and brings together a bunch of references from existing design guidance. A lot of FHWA, ASHTO, an ITE publication, and some of the NACTO publications. Next. Also, just a reminder that the bipartisan infrastructure law does prioritize complete streets. It encourages the adoption of complete streets standards. And also it encourages planning for complete streets types of things, which it defines as planning for a network of sidewalks, bikeways, pedestrian and bicycle trails, both to connect communities, and it says connected neighborhoods with destinations, and also integrating with public transportation, increasing public transportation ridership, planning to improve the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians, planning to address travel demand through alternatives to new highway capacity, and then also planning to support transit-oriented development. But I just wanted to frame, how the bipartisan infrastructure law is basically defining what complete streets is. And so for the sections in the design guide, we landed on introduction, which is basically benefits of complete streets, process, planning and design, which is like within the state, within the region, and a section on within your local community. Example typologies, complete streets are not the same everywhere. And that was an important discussion point within the advisory committee that we had, because, in rural areas or suburban areas, they're going to look really different from in urban areas. And the bulk of the guidebook is the toolbox, which has sections on sidewalks, roadways, intersections, and curbsides. Next slide. So the sidewalk section includes like stuff that goes in the sidewalk area, basically. So that includes like driveways going across sidewalks. There's some discussion about slopes and ADA compliance, and we did make sure to integrate the ProLab into this. When we started, NISOT had already moved to using ProLab. Street furniture that would be on the sidewalk, wayfinding, bus stops, because those are on the sidewalk, lights, trees, and stormwater management, green infrastructure types of things are in that chapter as well. Roadways, talking about allocating the use of street space. So, those discussions we have, like Central Avenue, with bus infrastructure and the big desire from the city for some kind of bike infrastructure with the road diet there. Travel lanes, lane diets, road diets, the feasibility of road diets, and ways to consider that. Traffic calming, some transit information, a bunch of types of bicycle facilities, and some discussion on shared lanes and bicycle boulevards as well. Intersections is these are the sections within the intersections chapter. So we do look at roundabouts, some bicycle priority stuff, transit priority, and pedestrian, different kinds of pedestrian crossing methods. Can go next. And then curbside is kind of the more newer stuff that's maybe more interesting to us. Curbside management, on-street parking, loading and delivery zones, pricing of parking, and also parking for other kinds of modes. Bus stops as it applies to the curbside where the bus is coming. Electric vehicle charging, parklets and pop-up projects. So using that curbside for things that we wouldn't, you don't traditionally think of as like a street use.
What is a parklet? Oh, okay.
There's a parklet. It's like a mini park that people might, but you see it. I mean, in a sense, it's similar to what we have done during COVID with on-street dining kind of thing, but they make it instead into like a,
All the parking areas that you put little barriers around.
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
there's a space, using that roadway space to extend
Yeah, that has
the use, this sidewalk side use. And I think that's the last slide.
Great, thanks, Carrie. So, this guidebook, we're gonna make available up on our website. We're getting a quote for about 200 hard copies, to start with.
I know where you can put 50 on February 1st.
Let me think. Saratoga County School Planning is on.
There you go.
Yeah, but this resource, is really meant for local governments to use. It really compiles the practices that are being used out there, and it really is intended to be a reference guide. The common question is, well, what happens on a DOT-owned road? And basically, there's some language in here that doesn't preclude us from not considering these things, but if you're a local government who has one of these streets in your community, obviously you have to coordinate with DOT on any one of these concepts, but things are evolving, the implementation of complete streets is evolving. Even the minute we publish this document, there's going to be more treatment types that are not included in this, so bear that in mind. But hopefully folks will find this compilation of information helpful to give to staff within your community who may or may not be well versed in complete streets language and universe of options.
To that point, who would be your immediate audience to be receiver of this?
I think personally, and Carrie, feel free to chime in, certain community planners are pretty well versed on this, but it's more your highway folks, your DOT or your DPW folks, your decision makers, to give them legislate, right, because the decision makers might not fully understand some of these concepts, but maybe this book can help them to understand when an idea gets raised, how it can be used in your community.
Yeah, I think I would also say, just for the planners, that we tried to put the references in there to the FAA guys or in the highway design manual. So if, so a planner might have in their mind of what they want, but not having like
Is there anything in there
possible, the reference might be helpful.
about emergency vehicles? Our biggest pushback, because we're doing a big complete street, road diet in the town, getting rid of ramps and taking 4-lane roads and going to, and our biggest pushback is from the fire department. When you talk to them, they don't even want end islands in the parking lot,
Yeah.
I mean, it gets, so I don't know if there's anything in there about, but that's a big pushback we had. They didn't want the medians, they don't want the trees, they don't want, they want nothing but asphalt, and so I don't know. I know that's, I don't know if there's anything in there about that. I don't know why our emergency vehicles keep getting bigger and less nimble, but that seems to be the trend. Every year they get a new vehicle, it's bigger, and the turning radiuses are different, so I'm just curious. I didn't understand that, but
So they
but-
can get around.
I don't know, I don't understand that, but that's our biggest pushback, is we've had a lot of discussions and back and forth with the fire chief that I don't want this and I don't want that, and I'd rather have the highway ramp. And we don't want to go through the intersection.
Our buildings are getting a lot bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You build in Albany, nobody, even a housing apartment is at 2 stories. They're going 3, 4, 5, or 6. So Albany has a need for more ladder trucks and a less need for shared streets. I can't believe we keep saying that about Central Ave, road diet for Central. It's like, my brain explodes.
Chris and Carrie were involved with a number of community-based workshops where I have a feeling this topic came up. Did you have any insights from what you heard from the communities when you held those workshops?
Well, about the emergency
Yeah, the best
vehicle,
specifics
it
of
did
your
come up, every workshop. So it's not an uncommon topic.
I think that a lot of it is getting folks in the room and having, that discussion and being realistic about it. I mean, originally, like, some of the folks, were like envisioning a scenario of like two emergency vehicles going in opposite directions at the same exact time. And it's like, well, that's not like an unlikely scenario. Like, let's be real, first we take space, we don't need to slow people down. I mean, we get it, response time is this thing about seconds, and no one disagreed with that. So it was about applying the right, okay, so maybe you don't on your route to the hospital do speed bumps. But, on these other residential streets, which are maybe secondary streets, there's better opportunities. So it's about, once again, as there's so many things with police streets, is getting all the people in the room and like, let's have some real conversations about what's feasible and what's not. And sure, we can apply certain standards to some of the roads that maintain that speed and access for emergency vehicles. That doesn't need to be every single road, every single residential street.
Was there any discussion about, I completely understand trying to convince the fire department to have more nimble vehicles and whatnot. But when it comes down to it, there's a decision-making process, and someone has to weigh what's the most important, right? Taking a roadway and making it whatever Central Ave is now, 6 lanes wide, and it's a huge road. And do we really want to do that, or do we want to make something that's better for pedestrians and bicyclists? And yeah, there's going to be some impact to emergency vehicles, but scale of 1 to 10, what is that impact versus the benefit to the other users? What we found is when we put our projects in, it comes down to who is the person making the decision, who's in the end us the permit for the work. And because every time we will put out, medians, curb bump outs, whatnot, we might have the city engineer and the city planners on board, but then it comes down to the DPW, DGS folks who are like, well, we can't plow that, right? And it just shuts the whole thing down. I think it's great that we got this resource, and we're going to use that resource to convince folks that what we need to make a better environment, urban environments especially, better is a good thing. But is there anything in here about that discussion of the decision-making process? Ultimately makes the decision of how a roadway is designed, because I feel personally, and many municipalities left up to people who maybe have a vested interest in just their point of view.
And
that makes sense.
I think Steve Strickman, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, and this is really timely. I just want to agree with what everybody said. I have a meeting at 2 today with the fire department and Creighton Manning on our federal street study and islands, roundabouts. I'm working on a project with Ross and CDTA about making an area more pedestrian friendly, and the fire department's like, okay, you can get rid of that slip lane, but I want you to make the street 10 feet wider. They don't even, all sorts of issues with the parklets we put in. So I just want to address it, that this is an issue that continues to raise its head.
Well, it sounds like this is a topic that, while this design guide didn't necessarily get into the details.
Can I just jump in there? So
Yeah.
that second chapter that was about process, about like what state process is, and then regional, basically. And then the local is all about decision-making processes and how you want to frame your conversations or who's included in those early conversations. So, hopefully some of that is helpful.
And it sounds like we'll have to do some more research and maybe provide some more resources of practices from other areas that have, I know City of Ithaca has an engineer who's been fighting this fight with his fire department for some time. And so we can reach out and maybe compile some practices in other communities that have worked to address some of these concerns. Like the speed humps is a great example. There's a way to design them for the fire trucks so that they roll over them appropriately.
And just remember that, City of Albany's had 50-story buildings since for centuries, and the city hasn't burned the ground. So
It's not new.
The first thing when I saw this, supposed to do that. Was a meeting. You go through the meeting materials, first thing I looked at it was again, I'll go back, first thing pop in my head was February 1st, okay? And it would make, I'm saying, for me, looking at it, as anybody else sitting around here, saying, man, that'd make a nice session at a planning and zoning conference or something. But, well, it would, it'd be great because everybody here would really, you get into it, you know? But I turn to Steve or to myself, sitting on planning boards. And my thing to do for, of course, for something to get out here to a session that is going to grab attention of planning and zoning board members. Not even to the local officials. They wouldn't, they're the ones who should be in a session like this, and they wouldn't attend, but there's nothing. The thing is, when you come down to that second chapter that Carrie was just making a reference to, that process stuff, that's probably where it comes up. Where does it come up on a local level? Where you have your subdivision regs define how, what your road system is, how it's designed and everything. And then you got another thing when you start doing site plans, you know, what you need for travel, like right in between. But to get this past my board chairman to say, make it one of the 16 sessions on there. This first thing is going to be, well, what's a planning board member care? And in all that discussion, Steve, I wanted to ask you, you're sitting there, right? Would this be something that a planning board member would want to see as
The complete streets.
as a training
discussion?
session?
I don't see why not. I mean,
Should.
it's a important topic, you know, I think it's different from every municipality. Maybe Peter wants to chime in here.
I mean, I think we should gear it more towards site plans, you know, I mean, I think I'm not designing any streets in Rotterdam.
They already exist.
Yeah, they exist, so
Right.
you're looking at apartment complexes, you're looking at condominium developments, those type of things. You know, and obviously with the developer, a lot of times will try to do the minimum amount. I mean, with fire department, and they want us to, you know, the opposite, and there's no, you know, there may be some ways to incorporate that into the design guidelines or performance standards and a zoning code to say, okay, maybe we include these and encourage. the-
And that would
I'm
be
not
the-
saying the fire department's wrong. I mean, we gotta work with them.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
we've worked with them, okay, we're not gonna have trees at the, you know, here, and we're gonna have multiple curbs, and we're gonna, but you know, at some point when they say, you know, you can't have landscaped end islands in a parking lot, it starts getting, you know, oh, wait a minute, you know, we can't just have a sea of asphalt. So I think it's a balancing act, and obviously it's what they do is important, and emergency service is important, so you need to work through some of these issues, you know, so, you know, but, you know, I'm just saying, you know, we know people are getting killed, pedestrians getting killed on the street, we know, we're trying to incorporate some of this stuff. You know, we know we've had a lot of accidents, you know, things that are, you know, definitely happening that are based on the design of the road. And so
I have a few less emergencies.
might have a few less emergencies when, but, you know, obviously it's a balancing act, so. But, you know, but it's an important discussion, and it's where we've had sort of some of these things.
We need to move along, but
I just want to make one suggestion to
Yeah.
get to the legislators. NICOM Association of Towns just came from a presentation, you know, they just had a session to, you know, focus this on the decision makers, and of course, the planning is an important, you know, audience. I don't know how you get in front of the firemen to convince them, but.
A lot of it has to do with Department of State too, because the fire regulations, the New York State Building and Fire Code, there's a section in there that says authorities having jurisdiction can modify the regulations. So it varies amongst communities. You're going to get different answers amongst the different stakeholders, so the consistency is not there. So I think that is a bigger discussion with Department of State. That clause is probably the most frustrating.
So moving along.
Thank you.
CDTC Infrastructure Committee, is that? what we're heading
yeah,
now?
so real quick, actually Jacob is going to walk through our proposed approach to the TIP infrastructure. We're starting to refer to it as a task force for now. So why don't you walk us through that, and we'll be looking for members from the planning committee to be a part of this. So go ahead, Jacob.
Okay, so Sandy mentioned, we're going to be looking to roll out a TIP task force or advisory committee. I guess depends
The name's TBD. But really, the goal for this is to get kind of a subset of our planning committee members together to really just discuss the TIP update process and TIP management processes. And make recommendations on how they can be improved. How we want to go about doing this is ideally, and really this is just kind of all an outline. Once the committee actually gets together and gets moving, these things could change. But the idea right now is that we would kind of have an initial 4 meetings to debrief on the TIP process. And then from there, develop what we're going to call a TIP policy document. So we're going to get direct input from our committee members on what they would like to see changed along the lines of the evaluation process, around the application process, the kind of programming process. So everything that goes into building the TIP, we're going to be looking for comments on. Put that into kind of a, couple page policy document or memo, if you will, that could then be brought to the planning committee for approval. That's essentially going to be kind of laying a roadmap for staff to then go ahead and try to make changes to that TIP process for the next update. So it's really kind of looking for direct input from you guys on what changes staff can make to the process. So we've kind of just laid that out here again as an outline, what we think the first 4 meetings might look like. And that's really, again, just that debrief on the last TIP update. And then also going into looking at the existing TIP amendment guidelines and kind of the TIP, our TIP website and how we display that information to the committee and to the public. Hopefully we would have that, after the second meeting, we would kind of, staff would start developing that policy document. And then it would be finalized, hopefully in June. Like I said, from that point on, then staff could kind of move forward with actually doing those improvements to the process. But then once that kind of first TIP debrief portion of the, that's kind of the task force piece that we're seeing. But from there, it could kind of then shift into more of a working group, something that we've kind of more traditionally done here at CDTC, where it's just a quarterly meeting to kind of discuss current topics and infrastructure, updates on that TIP evaluation update to the committee, as well as kind of some resiliency topics that we're seeing come up as well. In some of the new funding opportunities that are coming down, there's a lot of emphasis on resiliency. And we think that would fit well in infrastructure as well. So really what that means for this is next steps for us is that we're going to be reaching out to all of you to see what the interest would be in participating. So we'll be sending out some emails probably next week, highlighting, probably attach this outline. And then from there, be scheduling our first meeting in December.
Any questions? Great. So
Moving to
thanks, straight then.
what's our next topic here.
Equity policy
policy
update. Carrie's just gonna briefly review on what we've done since the, as you recall, the policy board authorized us to start developing an equity policy for CDTC. So Carrie will just provide a quick update.
Yeah, I have a very quick update.
Very quick.
Staff is working on putting together some draft policy language based on what we chose. It was either planning committee or policy board. And then getting feedback from the equity advisory committee members on that language.
So basically, it's a stay tuned. We're working on it. All right, and then the final discussion item, at least from our performance report, I should say, and upcoming things. Jen, you want to review what our Metropolitan Transportation Plan update scope?
Sure. So this is an outline of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan update that we are planning to start hopefully early next year. So as you know, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is our long-range plan. The current adopted plan is New Visions 2050. You may remember that we collected a lot of data, did a lot of work by staff in-house, released a draft plan to the public for review like March 3rd, 2020, and then the next week everything was shut down. So and then we adopted the plan September 2020, and things have changed a lot, as Andrew and Chaim showed. So we are planning on doing a overhaul of the plan. We are looking to do this in 3 phases. This outlines kind of just kind of some bullets on what would be involved in each phase. This first phase, which will start next year, would really just be like collecting the existing conditions kind of stuff. Looking at what where we're at, making a regional snapshot and creating a baseline for going forward with the planning process. And then the second phase is really kind of getting into the Metropolitan Transportation Plan update process. That would include a major rebranding of what we call our long range plan. We've called it New Visions for 20 something years. And we would like to rebrand that, kind of think differently, really involve, you know, all of our members and the whole region in developing that. So this is just our outline for where we're kind of going. We would love feedback, or if you have ideas for the long range plan, you know, definitely get in touch with me. I'd like to, we're collecting different models and looking at different approaches. And we are, you know, the planning committee and policy board will be both advisors on the plan and also decision makers. So large role.
Any questions about the long range plan update? You know, as Jen alluded to, we're gonna put a lot of resources into this. You know, we're not just going to say we're gonna do the same old, and present it the same way. Rebranding and updating based on some of the priorities of New York State, the state's climate action law. You know, certainly the bipartisan infrastructure law and other things that change, emerging trends. We were just at our national conference in Minneapolis, and there was a lot of discussion about some of these emerging trends in the transportation field. So these are all things that communities are going to have to start thinking about. And our long range plan is going to set the framework for how we program our TIP and how we use our planning dollars. So we're looking forward to working with you all on that process.
Is it a misnomer to call it long range?
Well, there's been debate about what's long range these days. I mean, the federal requirement is still a 20-year look, but let's be honest, I mean, we're barely able to look out 5 years and know what's going on. So, you know, I think that's part of our conversation is how to frame the policies and the priorities of the plan. And, you know, maybe there's a true long range uncertainty and we do some scenario planning. But maybe the shorter range is a little more strategic in nature, and these are things that we can work on through the process.
It just looks at from the quantitative analysis part, the standard deviation change is so huge. The longer you go out, that the viability of whatever exists on that plan comes into, you know,
Absolutely.
questions.
Absolutely.
With the planning too, is you were talking about vehicles and gas, you know, one of the things with electric vehicles, you know, the mandate, I don't know, they've mandated that, what, 2035 things have to be there, so then, you know, that becomes a target, right, that we have to look at, and then this is probably connecting too many things that are unrelated, but are probably gonna get related really quick, is I actually drove on the thruway for the first time, and I can't tell you how long, and I stopped at a new rest stop. It is 1/4 the size of the old rest stop. I don't know why. You know, I'm not to get specifics, but like the men's room went from like 20 urinals to 4, right? And everybody told me, people were telling me, oh, they don't want you to stay here. They want you to come and leave as fast as possible. There's 8 tables. But then if you start putting charging stations there and people need to be there for an hour and a half, there's nowhere to be, you know? So it's like that kind of planning of, yeah, you can put them all there, but then what are people doing? Because you just took these big rest stops. I mean, this thing was twice the size of this room. I've never been in a rest stop so small in my life, where when you're waiting in line, you're in people's way who are eating. So it's just like, you know, if you're gonna load it up with 50 quick charging stations that need a half an hour, are those people standing outside? I don't know how that, it's just that kind of,
For apartments, I mean.
Yeah.
The charging stations for.
and that's what we're trying to think of is like charging downtown. We have some charging stations, but if we start adding them, we already have an electric issue capacity downtown. So how much do you add? Then is it changing? Like, hey, listen, you gotta charge at home, you know, and you can't charge here. We have to raise the rates, so it's so much, right now, it's essentially free. So now is it like, you know, so expensive that you think twice about coming and using the public system? I don't know, but that's it.
You know, at some point, Jen we'll get into some more of the details, but we'll have some kind of a brainstorming session where you folks can have some time, either during this meeting or in a different meeting, to kind of brainstorm and pitch some of these very topics that you're saying, so we can put all of these concerns on the table. And see, are there practices out there? It's funny you mentioned Thruway. One of the AMPO conference sessions I sat through had to do with these things. Texas DOT is now eliminating the little transponder in their tolling collection system and going to a phone app to increase compliance on their toll collection, because most people have these. Not everybody has the transponder for the Easy Pass, and its violation rates are much higher where you have that in-car technology. So it'll be interesting to see how much more with pricing and things like this, these things come into play down the road. Or even an in-vehicle sort of chip or communication system for future monitoring and payment, because you're all being monitored. You all know this every day when you have one of these things. So it's a lot of interesting things that are changing.
Yeah, and we, on the outline, there's mentions of like enhanced public participation. In the last few updates, they've been the minor updates, and we haven't done like a really big like outreach and brainstorming session with planning committee, with policy board, with the public in quite some time. So we are hoping that there's an opportunity to do that again, really engage on like all these different ideas and understand what's going on in the region and like develop some solutions and strategies.
I don't have the meeting at that rest stop.
No. Well, I just say, there was an oddly blew my mind thing where you would do that. I
The
guess.
state didn't plan for it.
Let's stop it. Come on.
All right, moving along, right?
Yes.
2019-2024 tip selection move. Who is that?
So this month, looking at our project selection changes, again, these are small cost changes or schedule shifts in projects that don't come to planning committee. This month we have a pretty high number of these, so 14 in total. A lot of this is due to kind of what we talked about at the last meeting with the old tip and the new tip not aligning, as well as some stiff tip performance changes. So in total, 2 of these changes were made to align fiscal year 23 on the current tip with fiscal year 23 on the new tip, so that projects could be authorized. 3 rollover changes, so that's just projects that had funding in 22 that weren't obligated and brought into 23, so they could be obligated. And then 9 stiff performance changes. So these are all of those ones that we were moving construction out from 23 to 24 to improve our stiff performance for this federal fiscal year. So that's the summary.
Any questions? Good. Project delivery update. Jacob again.
It's me again. So we've got just a few consultant updates from last month. Got City of Troy, South Troy Industrial Park Road. Letting was held back in July. We've got an update on that. Town of Rotterdam.
And full.
What's that? And full.
Due to excessive claims coming in over the takings of eminent domain.
So is there any plan to relet that? Not yet.
We don't know.
Great project. Second one, New York 5S, bike and ped improvements, town of Rotterdam. NEPA concurrence was approved back in September. That's it for the updates. And then, so I've been saying this past couple meetings, still haven't gotten around to it, but for sure, as of the January meeting, we're gonna restart our monthly sponsor updates. I was able to go in and update my schedule, so probably next week I'll be sending out emails for project delivery updates that would be due for the January planning committee meeting. I'll be emailing Town of Bethlehem, City of Waterloo, and Town of Guilderland for updates on all of their TIP projects. And that is it.
Thank you, Jacob. Nice dock project. I just want to mention a couple lettings, the Glenridge Road, the overheight detection, highly anticipated project will be, bid opening is tomorrow for that, so. Be nice to get that implemented there. Couple other, in terms of cost, we had a couple of like multi-site guide rail project and then outside of our area, but the exit 24, the Northway bridge replacement, the low bids were actually $1 million plus below what the estimate had been. And granted, our estimates have been bumped up, trying to throw a dart at the wall of what inflation was looking like. But if nothing else, maybe a sign of stabilization a little bit more than cost savings. I mean, so I thought that was interesting. Status of CDTC planning activity.
I think we've talked enough, but you can see the summary of our active consultant planning work and some of our technical assistance projects and that are available on the website.
Status of regional local planning, CDRPC.
We had a good conference on Friday, posted 200-ish people. Had a good plenary on regulating recreational marijuana. The big takeaway from a transportation perspective, not sure if the folks who were there were got quiz or not, but you'll need some traffic management for the first locations that are open because they'll be very popular. People will drive it fast and go out really slowly. We have in draft form a work product from this year's UPWP about regional growth over the past 10 years. We'll be submitting that to CDTC for review. It's sort of a story map treatment of regional growth trends over the last 10 years. We're pleased to be repackaging that. We're continuing to work and solicit for technical assistance projects for that program. We are expecting bids back for the expansion of the juvenile detention facility on November 9th. So if you guys want to leave me any steel for that project, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. CDTA.
There's an RFP on the street, very timely based on the discussions we had about differences in travel patterns and then the update to new vision. So there's an RFP on the street for us to update our transit development plan and then also restructure our entire route system. This is obviously a multi-year endeavor, starting with the TDP, which is, as Sandy knows, very, very out of date. So we're probably going to be updating it. Luckily, it coincides with the changes that are going to be happening with new visions or whatever it's going to be called in the future. And just getting that out there for any consultants that are going to be interested. But for the route restructuring piece of it, just like we heard, our travel patterns are completely different. When people are traveling, where they're traveling is changed, although it's coming back. It's coming back at different times and in different places. So we've got to take our route system and make that adjustment for a post-COVID world.
Thank you, Ross. Nice that. It's been an update on a couple studies, the Troy-Manans, the 378 health study. We're currently working with the consultant to set up we've had an agency meeting and a stakeholder sort of meeting virtually already, but the individual municipality meetings are being set up. And the 18th of November, Wednesday, the 18th, we're gonna be up at Hudson Valley for a sort of big public 16. The other, yeah, Wednesday 16th. So anything do to help spread the word and participation with that would be appreciated. Lots of discussion of touchdown points on the east side of the river, along the Route 4 corridor there, so any sort of input. Lots of discussion regarding things we were talking about earlier about, origin, destination, peak hours, lots of things, between the growth over there and the college community. Grades, slope going up the hill there's a lot to be discussed over there, so any sort of input would be very much appreciated. Yesterday, a design team was tentatively designated for the 787 study. Really not much more to talk about at this point, as sort of the fee and scope and contracts and stuff get going there, to sort of formally make that announcement, but there were 6, then there were 4, and now there's 1. So on the staff side, I wanted to mention, we talked a little bit about the STIP here. Lost to our office, Ron Schaefer, who was our primary STIP person, is now, he'll be replacing Bill Hebert in the main office. They stole him away from us. So Ron will now be the statewide STIP person, so still a good asset for us, but lost locally. And some of you may have dealt with Tracy Balog in our traffic group, is retiring in a couple weeks, and she is the primary intersection safety evaluation, roundabout evaluation, sort of another technical loss in the office. Both of them moving on, which is technically now burning time, so she's already kind of tired. Kind of. That's it. That's it. All right, through away. Do we have anyone? What?
No one from Thruway and no one from the airport.
Playing about rest areas, they make terrible. They're not here. Albany Port District.
I'll be quick. Tonnage partnerships are still even or up, so we're still looking good. Manpower, women power as well. Our holding pattern on the big project is still sort of there. We're anticipating DDC permitting approval of what needs to be done next phase. I'd say Friday, I'm hoping by next week. And literally when that happens, we tell 50 trucks to get on the site and they're going to start working. And I'm hoping that happens in the next 2 weeks, and then federal approval for waterside in December. And a very small note, but fun for people that work where I work. Our cruise ships came back this year. I think most people probably know we have cruise ships. But American Cruise Lines comes to the Port of Albany, and then some bus up leaf peepers, some bus into the cities for museums. And I only found this year, being on the Dutch Apple for something else, a whole bunch go there. And the Dutch Apple can actually fit through the canals by about 6 inches on each side, and they go up into the canal system. So we had 3 ships this year. Usually we try to be around 5. They come for a day or 2, and it's a nice little perk for some of the businesses around. So that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Upcoming meetings, events, deadlines. Do you want to go through these, Sandy?
So just to highlight, the Walk and Roll Information Center, information session that Rima will be hosting on Friday on November 4th. There's a flyer on our bulletin board if you want to register for that, and our upcoming freight advisory committee. You guys want to just mention the event that you're holding?
So yeah, November 9th, 9 a.m. We're having a combined freight advisory and capital district and communities meeting, where we're going to have a little bit of the normal freight advisory stuff. We talk about our freight planning activities, and then most of the meeting is going to be talking about alternative fuel vehicles that are available both for freight and for yard activities and things like that. And hopefully have actually a couple of vehicles outside on presentations from the manufacturers. Hopefully have a couple of vehicles outside the parking lot to check it out. I think it's going to be a really interesting meeting. I think, hope you all consider sending out the invitation, encouraging others to come. I think it's going to be good for folks who, maybe are not necessarily the typical attendees at our meetings. Manage vehicle fleets and things like that. So I don't know, Jacob, did I miss anything?
No, that's pretty much it. I would say, maybe try to promote it to like DPW or fleet manager staff. We should have actually some electric skid steers here on site, so, you know, not necessarily like freight transportation or on-road, but also the off-road stuff, so that could be interesting. So yeah, I think we're gonna send that out. We haven't already to the committee and to send it.
Okay, good.
Send it to whoever, anyone that you think would be interested.
We'll send you folks the flyer today, so you can.
Are you trying to get contractors here or just municipalities and people?
Really anyone, it's public or private, but I guess just for this audience, I would, definitely the municipal kind of police would be interested. We'll have some presenters from BYD who has like full Class 8 electric trucks. I think Plug Power will be here with a hydrogen electric van. So that'll be a vehicle on site. And then a couple other kind of some new new thinking electric like fleet management systems as well. So kind of all things electric freight and multimodal.
Yeah, because it's not just for us, we'll push it out to all of our contractors.
Yeah.
Hope to get some more.
Thank you. Michael, did you want to mention your conference?
I already did.
Same day as the planning committee meeting, I believe, right?
Sandy mentioned it for me too, so we're all set.
We're done. We're all good.
Yes.
Adjourn. Get a motion to adjourn. Great. Do I have a second? Thank you, Randy. All in favor, aye? Aye.
No.
Listen, that,
I'm available.
Ross.
I know you.
Yeah, no,